Now, this is our first poem we're looking at in terms of romantic poetry, and we're starting where we should, which is, of course, with Mr. William Blake, who, if you watch that documentary, kind of creates the romantic voice in a pretty profound way in England, when he starts to, question essentially the institution and put value on the individual in all ways. And so there's a kind of secularism behind this, as much as there is an individualism behind it, and the strive for the human to rediscover beauty and the sublime. And he does this poem. There's two poems. They're connected. There's really part one and part two of the same poem, The Chimney Sweeper. And these are from an illustrated book he had called Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience. Now, this is where this stuff gets kind of important, because those terms, those words, we use them in the way the Romantics would consider. We use the word innocence to mean childhood, to mean a state almost of bliss, of being unaware of the horrors and the horrifying situation of the world around you. And that really comes from the Romantics and Blake and so forth, to use innocence in that framework. Experience relates to the idea of adulthood and the idea of being removed from being the child and no longer being the child. And there's a pining to go back to that world, to not know that there are horrors and all this kind of stuff. Prior to that, those words, innocence and experience, like all language, was owned by institution, and one of the big institutions being church and so forth. And so innocence pertained prior to that to, the Garden of Eden state, innocent of the knowledge of God, in that sensibility, and so innocence was a lack of sin, and so that's why we have the word innocent in terms of it being used in courts. You're either innocent or you're guilty, and that's used in that much more traditional framework. Children weren't seen as innocent. Children were just seen as children, young, essentially sinners, who had to be brought to innocence, to goodness, through experience. So you can see how things have changed. And so these poems kind of reflect this new way of looking at things. And so what Blake does is he goes straight to the emotional core of that idea and picks up on where children are being exploited, at least in the society that he is familiar with. And one place is in The Chimney Sweeper. Now, chimney sweeps were usually and traditionally children, for the obvious reason that, which is horrible when you think about it, that they can fit inside that very small space. And so it's very easy to get a child, and we're talking very young here, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, to go into those chimneys and to work and so forth. Now, you and I know the danger that such things like coal dust and all that would do to us. Whether or not they knew that, they don't know, but of course no one could suggest that's a natural air for anybody to breathe, or a good thing to breathe in, even if you don't know what the medical result will be. So Blake saw this as a thing he called exploitation. So yet again we get that concept of exploitation in humanity, as opposed to sufferance in life, reward in heaven. Reward in life is Blake's movement, and that's the tendency to the romantic in many ways. So let's have a close look at the first chimney sweeper, and then we'll get into that second one. So the first one is from the voice of the child itself. So you have this little child here, when my. So you've got this sort of first person narration and so forth. You got this first person there. When my mother died, I was very young, and so this child has a catastrophe at this early age, and so the father sells the child. And my father sold me, while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, 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 weep. So you got some repetition there. So your chimneys I sweep, and in and sweep. And so here we have that second person. So by the way, you people who so you get second person there, You people who are hiring me or are using me, hear my story, hear my tale, and perhaps you won't exploit such people as myself. So then this young boy has this dream of his colleagues, his people who work with him, being rescued and sent to heaven, which is the dream of the traditional concept that this toil means that there will be reward, and that reward will be after the life we've lived. There's little Tom Dark Grey, who cried when his head got curled. We'll continue, sorry, my phone just rang. So in this second stanza with little Tom, who's crying and weeping and having an awful life, he's being told, he gets told by somebody, probably a parent or at least the person who's running the chimney sweeping company, hush, Tom, never mind. Hush, hush, hush. Do not complain. Do not fret. Do not worry about the self. Don't worry, you're fine. For when your head's bare, you know that soot cannot spoil your white hair. This is the thing. When you die, this won't be a problem anymore. And so he was quiet. That settles him down. And that very night, as Tom was sleeping, he had such a sight that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins black. So he has this terrible nightmare or nightmarish image. But then you get heaven comes down and takes these kids and gives them their reward. And by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing they run, and wash in a river and shine in the sun. So cleaning off all the imagery of their toil, all the nastiness and so forth. Then naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise up clouds and sport in the wind. And the angel told Tom if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father and never want joy. So that is the much more traditional version of innocence. That's a Garden of Eden kind of imagery, isn't it? And my pen doesn't really do a great job, but there we are. A Garden of Eden imagery, just running completely free and free for the self and so forth. And isn't this wonderful? And isn't this a brilliant image? And isn't this grand? Very, very also pertaining to that sort of romantic imagery as well. And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark and got with our bags and brushes to work. Through them, though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm, so it was all duty. They need not fear harm. So he's reminded Tom, as all of them are, that their duty and doing this dirty work will give them this reward. But of course, you would argue that it's an ironic or sarcastic thing because it goes completely against the horror that we've been given right at the beginning of the poem, and the soot and the ugliness and so forth. And so really, when you're reading it, your emotional response pertains more to the ugliness of the children than to the perception of the reward. And so the children are working for what seems to be a fool's errand, really, for Blake at least. So we come to the second part now, and then the second part's in Songs of Experience. So this is the adult world, no longer the child's innocent world. So this is the truth laid bare, this is the ugliness. And so an adult comes across a child left and found, covered in soot, has been working in the chimneys and so forth. A little black thing among the snow, crying weep, weep, weep in notes of woe. Where are thy father and thy mother, say? They have both gone to the church to pray. So this child's been left and neglected, but the parents are doing the right thing because they're going to church, you see. So there's a little bit of kind of disharmony here. Because I was happy upon the heath and smiled among the winter snow, they clothed me in the clothes of death and taught me to sing the notes of woe. So this stanza here is, of course, the burning of innocence. This is the removal of innocence. You must, of course, suffer and know joy, because if you live a life of joy, you will, of course, not be given reward in heaven. So that the nastiness and brutality of life comes from this falsified teaching of the church, this ruination, which is what Blake was seeing at the time. Okay, so the church at the time is causing this, at least according to Blake. Certainly not how the church sees itself now, but this was the reaction against it, because everyone had to change, I suppose. And because I am happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury, and are gone to praise God and as priest and king, who make up a heaven of our misery. Okay, and so this last one, of course, the child doesn't seem to suffer, so therefore we've done a good job, and aren't we great and aren't we good? And yet the child is found in a position of suffering and of weeping. There is kind of like that oxymoron. There's the image of joy and the image of sadness. So with experience comes the horror. And that's really what's going on with this particular poem.